Good morning, this is Lisa with Lux Perennials Nursery. Today we're going to talk about what to cut down in fall and when and why. It's a crisp November morning and we still have a lot of color in the garden. We haven't had a freeze yet. We're going to talk about what to cut down and when and why. But look at all this amazing color in the garden. Don't be in a hurry to cut some of this down yet. Let's talk about when you do it first. It's November, it probably feels like you should be out in the garden and cutting these things back and getting ready for winter, but really the best timing is to wait until after we've had a few hard freezes. That might be late November or it may even be December, and that's usually when we cut things down. It's really best for the health of the plant to wait until then. You can cut it down now, but it's better to wait. So once it comes time to prune things down, what should you prune and what should you not prune? Okay. Let's start with what you should not prune. There are three categories. One, if the plant's evergreen or semi-evergreen, then don't prune it. It's for you. So it'll look nice over winter and you want to keep that foliage. Second, if the plant is something that needs good drainage, that's like penstemon or Augustaki, which is also called Hummingbird Mint, or wallflower or Salvia, those all need really good drainage. Leave their foliage on. It's for the plant's benefit. Leave their foliage on, it'll protect them over winter from getting so wet. And then third thing not to prune is anything with seed heads or cover, or like most things I don't even prune in the fall. I leave it for the insects and for the birds, so it's for them. So it's for you, the evergreen plants, it's for the plant's benefit, the ones that need good drainage, or it's for the animals and the beneficial insects in your garden to have cover and food over winter. So those are the categories for don't prune it. Okay, how about if you should prune it over winter? There's also three categories. Okay, then so what should you cut down in the fall? Well, I don't cut down that many perennials, but the main things I cut down are, one, if the plant is something that is more disease prone. So things like bee balm, which is Monarda, phlox, hollyhock, they tend to get, some of those get rust or they get powdery mildew. Veronica also gets powdery mildew. So if you see that kind of thing, lupin, cut those down and get that diseased plant material out of there. Second, anything the slugs truly love. They munch on a number of things, but they love hostas. They love delphinium. I cut those down. In fact, we've already cut our hostas, even though we haven't had a frost, because slugs make babies like crazy in those things, and I don't want to encourage that. So I may put a little slug bait in, we cut it down so they don't have cover. And those are the two main reasons. So now let's walk through the garden. Get ready. We're going to cover a lot of plants in a short time, and we're going to see plants from all those categories. Here we go. Here we go. So this first plant is flag lily or Hesperantha. It is an evergreen and a winter bloomer. Don't cut it down. You can trim it up in March if it starts to look a bit ratty. We'll get to that in the spring. Look at these beautiful hydrangeas over there and this salvia that is just still going. Look at that gorgeous royal purple. Don't cut the salvias. It wants great drainage, so leave that foliage on as long as possible. The only exception for that is when it does drop all of its leaves, and if it's just sticks there, I do tend to cut it back. Otherwise the wind can whip these tall salvias, and I'll put extra mulch on it to protect it. I don't cut my hydrangeas at all in the winter. I leave those flower heads on, and we'll talk much more in spring about how to cut hydrangeas and when. This is Rudbeckia. This is a beautiful color called cappuccino. It's got this beautiful rich orange and burgundies, and it needs good drainage, and so I tend not to cut it back. Plus the seed heads are something the birds really enjoy. Keep going here. This is Geranium Roseanne. We'll see more of that everywhere. So looking a little bit ragged here, but I don't cut that down either, although we may trim back some of those stalks that the deer have trimmed a little for us, because it can actually stay green quite a bit of the winter. It's not quite semi-evergreen, but it depends on what our winter's like. But I'll probably just leave it. This is Geum. I love Geum. You guys know it's one of my favorite plants. It's evergreen. Don't cut it. This is Centranthus rubra, or Jupiter's beard. Look at the beautiful flowers still on this, and you'll see a lot more of these. This one is It's not really semi-evergreen, but there's just really no reason to cut it back. It doesn't get a disease or anything, so I just leave it, and it will keep foliage actually quite a while depending on our winter. Over here, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. This is a beautiful penstemon. The color there, that deep plum, is called Raven. Penstemon need good drainage, so I leave their foliage on. Don't cut. This is Sweet William. It's not blooming at the moment. It blooms in May and then off and on through the summer. This one's a beautiful burgundy one. It's really semi-evergreen. This will actually make a nice carpet. It's kind of moving out here, almost a ground cover, and stay green pretty much all winter. Don't cut it. These two here, this is Hummingbird Mint or Augustaki, still beautiful color on it. This one's Coral Sunset. And this is a purple wallflower here, still got some purple flowers on it. The wallflower needs good drainage and it's evergreen, don't cut it. And the Hummingbird Mint or the Augustaki here, it needs great drainage, don't cut it, leave that foliage on. See what I mean? How much of this where their foliage really can stay on. So we keep going. This is a beautiful candy tuft, it's evergreen, don't cut it. The yarrow here is an interesting example. Again, still blooming, and we've been deadheading our plants kind of all through the season to keep them blooming for a long time. That's why we still have so many blooms here in November. But this yarrow, I'm going to zoom out a little bit, you can kind of tell it's pretty short, and it gets taller than this, but we pruned it probably a couple of months ago, and now it's got this nice, fresh, beautiful green foliage that it's going to hold maybe most of the winter. So if your yarrow is tall and floppy, go ahead and cut it down to about 4 to 6 inches, and you'll probably get some basal growth. There's probably growth there already. You'll see it once you cut it back. And then you'll get that nice little carpet of fresh green for a lot of the winter. And these beautiful plants are fuchsia. This one happens to be to bronze black cherry. You just can't do it justice unless you actually are here to see it. It's covered in flowers, and there's a couple more of them over here. I don't cut my fuchsias back at all until late spring. I wait and see what the growth looks like. The stems, the foliage helps protect it, and there's just no reason to cut this back. So just let the leaves drop and don't cut it. Hydrangeas, as I said, this one is one of my favorites, Glowing Embers. Look at this color on it in the fall. Isn't this incredible? Some hydrangeas get these brown seed heads and they just look ugly. You want to just clip those right off. But these are so beautiful. They just hold this color for quite a while. So why would you cut that? Don't do it. Now I see over here, this is some Joe Pye weed. I will say there's probably a category I've left off, which is, this is kind of optional whether you cut it or not. It doesn't look very good. So some of these things, if you just don't like the look, it's your garden, cut it if you like, right? But I would say you can leave these seeds up for the birds. However, Joe Pye tends to seed all over the place. So we won't be leaving it up. We're going to be cutting this back fairly soon, actually, to prevent more of these seeds from going all over the place. But I have a reason. If I cut it back, it's got to have a reason. This sweet little guy right here is bee balm or Monarda. And one thing I mentioned was that Monarda tends to get powdery mildew, and so I would cut it back. This variety, Electric Neon Pink, it's one of my favorites, and I sell it at the nursery. It doesn't tend to get that, so we probably actually won't cut this back because there's just no need to do it. Persicaria here, it's a beauty. Look at this, it's still got flowers on it. This one we probably will not cut back. There's no need to cut it back. It doesn't get diseased really. But if it looks too scraggly for you, or when the leaves are really brown and there's nothing left, of course you can just trim that up and cut it back. Okay, we're gonna pick up the pace. It's penstemon, don't cut it. It's geum, don't cut it. Salvia, don't cut it. Centranthus or Jupiter's beard, don't cut it. Here's more yarrow, also still blooming its little head off. Don't cut it. This yarrow here, Summer Wine, beautiful color, but you can see we actually cut this one, but maybe it's been too long. So this is a great example. Let me just show you here. we are gonna cut this one back. That's got a cute little, I'm gonna get in here and cut a little bit, cut these down and show you. And if you can see here, I only cut a little bit, but look at this great foliage, so cute. This really fresh new foliage, this is just coming up. So if you want a little carpet of that in your garden, take off some of those old stems, like the ones I just took off there, some of these here, and then you're gonna, the plant will have that fresh foliage on the bottom. Let's talk about dahlias. Dahlias are a bit of a special case. They do need great drainage, so according to my categories, that means you shouldn't cut it down. But the reality of dahlias is that after we have a hard freeze, and this may not even be till early December, the whole plant, the leaves will turn black or brown, and they're going to drop, and the plant will look terrible. And you don't need to leave it standing. I don't. I'll cut them all the way to the ground, and I mean all the way. The stalks are all the way down, and then I cover them with gravel. Can you see that there's this little pile of gravel here? So sometime in November or probably in December, after we cut all these down, we're going to refresh anything that needs good drainage. That's the penstemon, the hummingbird mint, the dahlias. We'll put a little extra pile of gravel on them, and to keep that little mound of gravel helps, some of the water just drain off and not sit on it, and helps keep it a little bit drier over winter. But I would never dream of cutting it now. Look how beautiful it is. More dahlias looking gorgeous. Can you believe these dahlias are blooming and looking like this in November? Look at the castor bean plant. I basically have a little forest of castor bean this year. Such a fun effect with this kind of coral tangerine dahlia. So don't cut on the dahlia, not till it turns black, as we talked about, and then you can cut to the ground. Here is some hummingbird mint. Still got a little bit of color on those seed heads. They're pretty, but that needs good drainage. We're gonna leave it up. This Rudbeckia here, cherry brandy, looking a little tattered, but we're gonna leave those up. We're gonna leave those seed heads for the birds, and it also likes good drainage. This little plant here is called Echium Red Feathers. It has these beautiful raspberry flowers starting in May for several months. It needs great drainage. You can kind of peek and see the gravel there underneath it. So same thing, don't cut it. It needs great drainage, leave it alone. Kind of a sea of Jupiter's beard there. We're not going to cut. More penstemon, look at this beautiful pink, loaded with flowers, and fuchsia. So you can see that we're just not cutting most of this garden. So let's look at a few things we are gonna actually cut. As I mentioned, the things I cut down are things the slugs love, as well as plants that are disease prone. We have some hollyhocks back in the back. You can kind of barely see them through there. We're gonna cut those down because they get a bit of rust. The hostas are the big ones we cut. We haven't got to these yet, but we've already started cutting our hostas back. And we actually, when we cut things down, we cut them and leave like a couple of inches above ground so that you can see as much as possible where the plants are in spring and not dig up a plant by accident. So these hostas will be coming down. So here's a hosta that we've already cut down, and there's a number of them in this bed. You can see them cut, but you can see how we left a lot of the stems up. They'll kind of naturally disintegrate, but we really know that hosta's there, but it gives us the ability to sprinkle a little slug bait in there and hopefully not have a slug nursery so much come spring. This is a good example, again, of semi-evergreen. This is yarrow. Look how pretty this is. Just this feathery, ferny foliage. I just want to keep that as long as possible in the garden. This is echinacea, right, or coneflower. And it doesn't look great, I'll give you that. So if you don't like it, you can cut it down. It's turned black and brown, but the birds love these seed heads. So, and it just, all of this foliage that's still up over winter just makes a great habitat, food and shelter for birds and insects. And I'll just have to show you, look at this incredible plant right here. This is called Phygelius, and the hummingbirds love it. In fact, I think I hear one coming. And it blooms, it started blooming in probably July, and it blooms all the way through November, sometimes into December. And I love having it next to my office so I can see the hummingbirds go by. Here's a good example of a bit of a challenge. So this is hummingbird mint. So it needs good drainage, so we would say don't cut it back. However, it's falling over so much that it's kind of clobbering some other plants next to it, and it's bending the plant over. We probably will clean this up a bit and just cut it maybe, you know, to about 2 feet tall. I don't prefer to do it, but I don't want the plants to kind of pull out of the ground or get so heavy. And sometimes if they're in a windy location, this isn't one of those, but if it gets too windy, you have to cut it back some or it's just gonna rock the plant so much and really disturb its roots. This is Mucdinia, Crimson Fans. You can't see much of it left. It actually has red on its leaves even through the summer, which is one thing that makes a beautiful ground cover. But I'm showing it to you because it's one of the plants that it's already pretty much going and almost gone dormant for the winter. You can kind of see it here and in a few other places. It's just mostly brown leaves. Once these are all brown, you can either leave the leaves or you can just gather up these brown leaves and compost them or dispose of them. But I encourage you to consider leaving leaves. If the leaf material you cut back, if it's not diseased or anything like that, you can just leave them where they fall, and a little layer of leaves. Again, it's great for insects. You can see some of the rhododendron leaves back there. We're just gonna leave those, and you can just leave a carpet of those. It makes kind of a natural compost, and again, food and shelter for insects and birds and things over winter. Peonies, this is peony. Peony's one thing that you can just cut back. You know, if you don't like the look of it at this point, it's had a nice fall color, but it's kind of losing that. You can just trim it back and either leave some of the leaves, or you've got those big stalks, just go ahead and compost that. So we're coming up to some different plants now. So this one is Phlomis, or Jerusalem Sage. You can see its cool seed head here. This was a bright yellow, beautiful lemony yellow. It gets these great flowers on it. It's evergreen, so don't cut it. We even leave the seed heads up so the birds can eat those if they want. The plant behind it is called Solidago, or goldenrod. It's kind of flopping over now and this kind of thing. We're going to cut it, not because it's floppy, although that's not a bad reason to cut it, but because it also likes to seed around the garden, and while I love having it here, I don't want it everywhere. So we're gonna cut that back, and we may not even put it in the compost pile because we don't necessarily want a lot of Solidago seeds in our compost pile. There's wallflower, don't cut it, it's evergreen. More dahlias, we talked about that. Aren't they beautiful? Can you believe the dahlias are still going in November? So this is Aster. It's a New Zealand Aster. This is Purple Dome. It was spectacular. If you were out visiting in September or October, you just saw this whole thing was solid purple. So it's done flowering now. It's gonna just look like this all winter. These leaves will turn black and brown. Sometimes we just leave this, you know, again, for cover for insects and birds and things like that, and the seed heads. And then sometimes if it drives us a little too crazy, because it really just looks completely brown and black, we just trim it back. So there's no urgency to do it. It's a hardy, tough plant. We could cut it back now, if now's when we have time to do it, or wait till December, or not at all. So some of this is a choice. Hey, let's talk here a little bit about lavender. So we've got some beautiful lavender here. We trim it throughout the season, so we get not just one bloom, but 2 or 3 different blooms, and it's on its like 3rd bloom cycle now. Lavender is evergreen, so you might say, okay, great, we don't cut it, but you do. It's kind of its own unique exception. Lavender has this really woody base. I don't know if you can kind of see it there, but these woody stems, and if you never cut it and never prune it, it gets long and leggy, which some of mine have done that in the past. So we generally cut it back, it depends kind of on the age of your lavender, to maybe a foot tall. And it's important that wherever it is that you cut, that there's some live tissue, something green is growing there. So we could cut this down to here. We could really cut this down to 6 inches. I can see growth there. But you don't cut it to the ground. Never cut lavender to the ground, you'll kill it. We have a number of different plants in here. We've got some more beautiful geum. Our geums are blooming here. That one, just a little bit. They just kind of bloom sporadically in the summer and into fall, but that's a coral tempest over there, and totally tangerine. Again, it's evergreen, so don't cut it at all. And then we've got a whole lot of foxglove. I kind of let the foxglove self-seed all over the place, and then if it starts to get annoying, we'll prune them, we'll take them out. Look, it's still blooming. They'll bloom again several times during the season. So we just have this sea of foxglove, and this one, you can see the slugs love it. See how they're eating holes in it? You know, the insects are gonna have a little bit to eat, so I don't worry about a few holes here and there. But I leave the foxglove. It actually ends up staying evergreen most of the winter, which is kind of nice. Less weeding to do, and you know, a lot of less standing water. So I just happen to leave it. And when it looks really ratty in spring, so say in March, we'll trim up all those ratty leaves, but that's for another video. Bearded Iris. This is a beautiful purple one. It's this velvety dark purple. The rain has just battered it. So it's amazing there's even a bloom on it. This is a reblooming iris. See all the buds here? It just got cold enough where they're not gonna open now. But for iris, we prune them down to these little fans. So about 4 to 6 inches tall. And then you'll get all this fresh growth in spring and not have to worry about cutting around all of these other leaves like this. So you can just go ahead and you can cut these down now if you have time for that. Just cut them down. We'll probably take down all of these flowering stems. Unfortunately, they're not gonna flower, which is too bad. But then your iris will kind of look like this, a lot of little fans in the ground. This is Nofia or Red Hot Poker. We've even got one flower on it still. Probably a record to have a flower on this in November. And I have quite a bit of it. See, this is all the Red Hot Poker here. It's evergreen. You know, it can look a little bit ratty this time of year, so you can kind of take a hand and put a glove on because it can be a bit sharp, and kind of comb through it or trim some of the ends back to make it look a little bit more neat for winter. But otherwise, don't cut this back. It's evergreen. It will stay green throughout the winter. This is a lily. This tall stalk here still has a bit of the flower, the buds, the seed heads left on it, but they're mostly fallen off. We'll probably just trim this up. It's just a big, thick stalk. We'll probably just prune this to the ground. The leaves are yellow and turning brown. We can do it any time now. Once the leaves are brown, we'll cut it back to the ground. The plant behind it that's starting to turn yellow, I love the beautiful color of it with the red veins. This is ornamental rhubarb, or rheum, R-H-E-U-M. And we'll wait for that to turn completely yellow and then brown, and then we will cut those stalks all the way to the ground. Those leaves are pretty big and heavy. They catch a lot of water. I don't usually leave them on the ground. However, things like these leaves right here, which come from this lovely crepe myrtle changing colors, we'll leave these leaves on the ground, again, just to add compost and richness to the soil. One note about leaving leaves, look at these nice dahlias as we walk by, and the beautiful burgundy amaranth. These also seed everywhere, by the way, these amaranth. They're annuals, but look how many came up from last year. I didn't plant one this year. They all came from seed, but they do make a beautiful color statement. And if we don't want so many, then we would cut them right now, and we won't put them in the compost pile. We will dispose of them because otherwise we'll have amaranth everywhere. But one thing to come back to leaving the leaves is that if you have something with diseased leaves, don't leave that. So not only does that apply to things like phlox, which are over here in the garden. So we're gonna cut the phlox down right here. In fact, we have some we haven't even planted yet, but some of these phlox, although again, this is the pink one, so it still looks pretty good, but some of them get diseases. We'll cut those back. And if you have fruit trees, also, you have fruit trees, that's super important to not only just to rake up those leaves, do not leave them on the ground, but dispose of them. Do not put them on a compost pile. Unfortunately, fruit trees are one of the hardest things to grow, and they have so many different pests and problems. You don't want all of that overwintering and coming back into your garden. So here's more things of what to cut and not cut. This is wallflower. It's such a beauty. I love this. It's evergreen. It's a short-lived perennial. It just blooms its head off from April until now. Gosh, it's November. It's still blooming. So beautiful. So don't cut that. We'll trim it back some. So after we get a hard frost, we'll probably take, all these flowers will die back. So we'll take those down. Then we may take the plant down to, I don't know, 1.5 feet tall. So take another 6 inches off the top of the foliage in addition to cutting the flowers off. These are pineapple lilies. Aren't they great? Actually, I could bring all these seed heads in make a beautiful flower arrangement. once their leaves start to flop on the ground like this, we generally will just cut them back. So we don't necessarily wait on these. They do have some slug damage here. We don't wait for them. We'll just cut these back in the next few weeks and dispose of these leaves. And look at the scene right here. Isn't this incredible? Look at this beautiful, this is Salvia Amistad with that royal purple. It's hard to see in the sun how beautiful that is up against these pink, pinky winky hydrangeas. This is my latest blooming hydrangeas. We have a series of different hydrangeas in the garden. Start blooming in June, and then the next one comes on in July, and then August, and this one comes on in August, September, and then holds this beautiful color for a long time. Well, let's talk a minute about daylilies. So these are all daylilies, and I love daylilies, not because they bloom long, because generally they don't, which is too bad, but because they're such beautiful flowers. But the foliage is incredible. It just makes the rest of the garden look good. Look at this curving, strappy foliage next to the giant leaves of that ornamental rhubarb, and you know, in contrast with the beautiful hydrangea, and then we've got Dahlia next to it, some, you know, beautiful pink coral hummingbird mint nearby. So just such a beautiful combination, that those sweeping leaves. So why do these daylilies, they look pretty good right now for November. We generally cut them back in August to the ground. They look kind of ratty in midsummer, and you know, instead of combing through and cutting every, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 leaves off each one, we just cut the whole thing to the ground. That spurs fresh foliage, and this is what it looks like by October, and it will keep this look for quite a while actually. Here's more Geranium Roseanne, still got a lot of its purple on, been blooming since May. Again, we won't really cut this back too much, and it will eventually turn brown, and we'll tidy some of that up, but leave the leaves on top as mulch. This is another great example. Again, it's just, look how nice this yarrow looks right there. Just nice and ferny, and again, it's gonna hold that color a long time. Or not color, sorry, that green foliage a long time. Here's a great example. There's the base foliage of the yarrow, and see the stems above it? They're kind of ratty, so we'll, you know, there's some blooms there, but we're just gonna cut those stiff, hard stems off and have that soft basal, B-A-S-A-L, basal foliage for the winter. Behind it is Salvia Amistad, a beautiful salvia. It can be tender over the winter, so we're pretty careful with it. We will leave the leaves on as long as we possibly can and leave it up, but we get really high wind up here, especially that hits these salvias directly from the north right back there. So probably sometime, it may not be December, but it could be January or even into February. Once it's really lost its leaves and it's just stems that catch the wind and rock the plant, I probably will cut it down to about 6 inches and then pile it with gravel, maybe even mulch to protect it a bit over the winter. This is Gara. It's still blooming. Behind it is another peony. We will cut that peony down, and the Gara we'll leave up. If it looks really bad, we'll cut it down at some point. More Geranium Roseanne hanging over the wall. We'll leave that until it loses all its leaves. Here's more fuchsia. One thing that you can do with fuchsia in the winter is, as I said, don't cut it. But when it loses all its leaves, so say in December, it looks like for this year, pile up 6 inches of wood chips or bark chips, just right on top. Just dump them right on top of the stems. It gives it a bit of a blanket for the winter. With no other plant do I do that, but it's helpful with fuchsia because while they're not as sensitive to the wet winters as much as like a salvia back there is, and this is another little salvia here, this pink one, we'll pile those guys with gravel mounds. This one, and the gravel mounds on these are maybe 2 to 3 inches tall, but we put 6 inches of wood chips on these because it's a blanket. It's not the wet we're protecting, it's the cold. A few more things not to cut. This is a Virginia. This one is pink dragonfly. It gets this gorgeous burgundy leaf in the winter, and it's evergreen, so don't cut that back. That's going to be beautiful. And hot pink flowers in spring. Right behind it, my favorite GM Totally Tangerine. And look at all the flowers it got on it for the winter. It almost looks like it has frost on it, not quite, but got its next bloom on there. So don't cut that, it's evergreen. This is more Red Hot Poker, Nofia. It's evergreen, don't cut it. Yarrow, don't cut it. This is Siberian Iris, so just a different kind than bearded. It gets so floppy, we end up, oh, look at the hummingbirds chasing each other on the Salvia. There's like 2 of them here. It's hard to see them, but they're so beautiful. There she is, there she goes. Anyway, cut back the Siberian Iris. We typically just cut it all the way back to, you know, a couple inches tall just to get it cleaned up. And you might be wondering what to do with Sedum. These are the big seed heads of the Sedum. They started pink and then they aged to cranberry, and now they're kind of just turned brown, and they are kind of splaying out a little bit. But just like the yarrow, look how they have this fresh foliage at the bottom. Can you see these little rosettes? So cute coming up. You can just clip these tall stems off down to about 2 inches tall, and you'll be left with all this cute little short foliage over the winter, making it an evergreen, very tidy looking plant. And let me make a comment about the stems. So this is a plant that doesn't have to have great drainage, but so we don't necessarily need to cut it down. It doesn't get diseases, but we can. So when it loses its leaves, say in December, after we've had some frost, you can cut the stems back. The leaves are going to be gone. You can leave the stems or you can cut them. I think to me it's an option, and sometimes just to neaten the plant up, or especially if it's really floppy, we'll cut those stems down. Same thing is true, so that's with Gara, we do that. This is Nepeta. This one has been cut back just through the season, but it usually has pretty long stems. When it loses its leaves, we would cut those back. The same is true here for the Persicaria. You know, it's pretty long. It's got long stems. You know, it's starting to lose its leaves. When it loses all of its leaves, we might leave the leaves on the ground, but then you have the stems to deal with, so we would cut those stems back. I hope this video has been helpful and given you some guidance on pruning perennials in the fall and early winter. And we'll just leave you with, on this beautiful, beautiful, crisp, almost winter day, with a few shots of the garden. Jupiter's beard, still blooming since May. We deadhead that one every month. More salvia or sage. Of course, this one is a don't cut because it likes to be well drained. All these great colors still in the garden. The amaranth and the wallflower, the coral. Yarrow raspberry, wallflower bull's mauve, penstemon ruby, Persicaria firetail, the flag lily, which this is its peak time here because it's a winter bloomer, September, October, November, and blending with all these beautiful fall colors that are just coming in, a little late this year I think, but look at the trees starting to turn color, the burgundies and the oranges up against the waterfall. The winter camellia are just starting to bloom. So lots of different fun combinations of long blooming perennials. What a beautiful, crisp Oregon winter day. Thanks very much, and let me know if you have any questions at all.